I did notice that the title of the presentation was the Secretary's Priorities. And I just want to make sure we know that's not in the context of the Farm Bill, because Congress writes the Farm Bill. And we are very astute to that in terms of how we are listening and how we're also responding to the questions we get about the Farm Bill. But as we're doing that listening and as we've had these conversations with so many of you, there's been some clear themes. Now, of course, the Secretary's, I think the place where B&I and the Secretary's priorities most connect is more and better markets. And man, have we seen those markets explode in rural America because of your investments. To see the level of interest in the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program is exciting. And to see the work that is being done on the ground as a result, I've had the chance of experiencing that, and I'm really grateful for it. It also connects with one of my priorities, long-term for rural development, and that's ease of access. Jackie Ponte and her team have done an incredible job with the 1RD guarantee, and that's also dramatically increased the excitement for the program. As we talk about ease of access across rural development, and I know that we haven't solved all the problems and that the environmental reviews are a key component of some of those challenges. But as we talk about ease of access across rural development, I think it's dishonest to do so without also talking about limited resources. Because the more we make a program easy to access for all of you, the more you bump up on our limits in terms of funding, and we sure experienced that last year, didn't we? So recognizing that as we make it easier to access our programs to support your bottom line and to support investment in rural America, we also have to think about how it's being strategically used and sharing that story to everyone who wants to hear. When we had conversations with Congress about the funding levels, because as you know, the president requested $1.5 billion for B&I guaranteed. The final mark was $1.25 billion. The questions we were getting back is, how do we make sure the funds that you are using are being used as strategically as possible? And I could respond with stories. I could respond with people I've seen whose lives were changed on the ground. But you make the decisions. And so figuring out how we show the strategy behind the work, I think, is very important. The other aspect of that is we've had folks come back and say, okay, we're really glad that B&I is booming. But some of our priorities are in community facilities. Some of our priorities, some of our biggest priorities, are making sure people have access to clean water and sewage systems that work. And so we need your support in boosting the investment in those places as well. Now, that's on the same platform as 1RD Guaranteed, so I think a lot of the ease of access opportunities are there as well. But that will strengthen our communications with Congress writ large, because it shows that we're investing in all of their priorities.
No, thank you. That was very good. So obviously, as you said, the success of the B&I program has been huge, and the funding level has been challenged. And we certainly thank you and your team for your support as we manage that money to stretch it, I guess I should say, to maximize the dollars. So I know from folks in this room, we're very appreciative of all the efforts there, and from Secretary Vilsack to get us that additional funding to get to the levels we did, because it was a tough situation we found ourselves in, and the B&I program has been a huge success, and I think. As we see, with inflation, the deals are larger in rural America, and certainly the program, the design of the program is to provide that access to capital, and certainly as we try to develop more jobs, create that economic development and out-migration in rural America, the success of the program and having those dollars there is so critical. And I guess that's one of the questions, what can we learn from the success of the B&I program?
It's a great question, and we talked a little bit about the ease of access, the ways that have changed. When I asked what was the change from B&I? How did it become so oversubscribed? I got two answers. The first was, we love the platform. 1RD Guarantee is wonderful. The second answer was, well, it's sure great to have 80% guarantee on all projects.
Yes.
But that means that those funds are going to be drawn down faster. And that's just a change, a regulatory change that impacts how much money is available. And so it's a lesson learned in terms of, are there things we can take from that to help us, drive interest in community facilities and WEP, because those are our priorities for communities as well. Another lesson learned about the success is that communication is crucial. We know, and that comes both ways, right? So because of the timing of the CR to the shift to the full budget, there was not a time where we could notify you that we'd passed that mark of expenditure. We front load investments in B&I based on the CR because we have some extra flexibility there. But then the final budget came in lower than we were anticipating. So we'd already used a lot of the funds that we did not expect, the percentage. We'd used more of a percentage of the funds than we'd expected. So now we know we've got to all be talking around when the budget comes and be prepared for whatever surprise that will bring all of us. And I think that's really important. Now we also know that those communications with Congress also have to reflect that nuance, that it's not that we're trying to hide the ball. It's that we are trying to give you as much flexibility up front as possible. I think another lesson learned is that our ability to compensate for an overwhelming interest in B&I is dramatically decreasing because we've done it over the last few years. So 2 years ago, we looked through every seat cushion to find funds that weren't expended, and we used them, right? We used a lot of the payback that we get from the loans that was sitting there, and then we put it into the program up front. Last year, we did an interchange. It was the first interchange in 10 years that included the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program. And that, I cannot overstate to you the amount of time, and you know how precious our staff time is at rural development, the amount of time that took. It is not going to be feasible in the future. In part because of how much time it took, time that could be used on other things like figuring out how to streamline environmental reviews, but also time and conversations with congressional decision makers who then are starting to ask, okay, but how strategic are all of the hotel investments in B&I? All of these things that we have to say, well, sometimes it really matters if the goal of a community is investment in tourism, then that really matters. But having to be on the defensive about those things can be very challenging. So I just want to let you know that because communication is crucial, it's also just crucial to share that was an unprecedented and unlikely to occur again feat. So we should celebrate that we did it together, but recognize that we can't count on it in the future.
Well, again, we very much appreciate all the time and effort that went into that. It was a huge success, particularly for rural America, to provide that additional capital. So thank you again for your efforts in getting that done as well. And you mentioned, focus on the water environmental program, CF, and I think most of us in this room, certainly most participate in the CF. I know for me personally, being from a very rural area in North Georgia, a county of less than 10,000, I know the impact, community facilities is made on my community, not only in the hospital. The community college is now a 4-year college because of CF. The hospital was revamped because of community facilities. And I certainly understand that, and Congressman Bishop spoke about rural health care and the number of closures of hospitals in Georgia. And that's certainly something that's very passionate for me. We work with Chad and the team on hospitals. And I think that's an area that certainly needs more attention. Obviously, if you look at rural hospitals, most of them, 50% of them lose money. It's a tough business. But once your hospital goes, there goes your community. And I think that's certainly an area, we could all as a group do, to try to help these rural communities through the health care. I know that's a bigger discussion, but that's certainly something I'd love to see all of us in the room try to help these rural communities with the health care, and certainly working with the agency to do that. And I know Chad and Joseph do a great job over there, and we appreciate that. And so that's an area I think we could work on. And I guess where I was going with that, other programs you'd like to see that we're not hitting on that we could do a better job with.
Two quick things first about healthcare, and I think that's crucial. So to put it in perspective, we got a little over $226 million in the interchange to extend BNI. There were $600 million unused in community facilities and WEP guaranteed. So there's funding there, there's opportunity there. And I think healthcare is a perfect opportunity to do that work. Because Chad Parker is in the room, and frankly, even when he's not, I sing his praises about the Emergency Rural Health Care grants. So as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, Chad was instrumental in putting together that program in a way that really worked for the way rural development does business, so that it not only supported investments in that immediate time, but also investments in building our team on the ground to be more responsive to those needs. That program is limited, right? It's funded for a certain period of time, but there are still some funds available. And the more we can look at the way our grant funding stacks with our loan funding, especially with community facilities, I think the better we'll be able to address some of the healthcare challenges. I also know that Chad has been very helpful in identifying ways. There are limitations on how much community facilities can fund housing, workforce housing, for example. But as long as it's not the majority of the project, you can expand a little bit. So we've seen some really interesting things within the healthcare sector where you're funding a clinic, the building of a clinic, but also a few residences, so that you can help attract that crucial workforce for healthcare as well in rural communities. So there's some, I think, exciting things that can be done there, and we'd like to continue that conversation.
No, I think the workforce housing is something that I know I see and hear about, and I'm sure many in this room do. So we would love to discuss and partner with you and the agency as how we could provide capital for workforce housing, whether it's through BNI, which we know housing is no longer eligible, but through the community facility program. So, maybe that's an area we could discuss in the future, because I think that's a huge need that we all see across all of the United States is workforce housing. So we'd love to discuss that. How do you sort of, I guess, look at how do we judge a program's success? I mean, we've talked, of BNI being oversubscribed, but from the agency perspective, what's your thoughts?
I really appreciate that question, because that's when we had those very detailed conversations with the interchange. And frankly, that's one of the reasons, something I'm really grateful to have experienced early on in my tenure, because I had to, it increased our communication with Congress, right, about the program. And that's when they started saying, what is the strategy behind every single investment that's made through BNI? And one of the beauties is that as investors in communities, you're looking at the business case, which is so often connected to the success of a community and to the people who live there. But sometimes it can be hard to justify all of them, right? And so the success is, I think, twofold. One, it's the data. How do we show that what your investments help us leverage other funds? And that's a key part of our key performance indicators, to show that we're leveraging at the expense of other funds. Where are those funds being focused? So are you investing in socially distressed communities or socially vulnerable communities? How are we that part of President Biden's equity focus includes rural. That's part of the definition of equity. And that's something that I love, because we know that people in rural America don't always get a fair shake, and that having to compete for grants isn't fair when cities get block grants that are much easier to allocate. So you're a fundamental piece of that, and being able to show that you're delivering on those measures are crucial. But nothing works better than a story. And I've had the chance to get to travel and see projects. I was in South Carolina this last year. It was this family-run business. And honestly, my team was a little nervous about me visiting, because it was an entertainment center. It was a family entertainment center, and those are always hard to justify,
yes.
Right? There were 3 generations working there. The father had grown up in the community and was really connected to, wanted to make sure that his kids had a place to come back to. He was so proud of his kids, and even more proud that they had chosen to come back home to South Carolina. And he was proud that he was providing a place for kids to enjoy and love in this small town. It was also the first Black-owned business that had received a BNI guaranteed loan in South Carolina ever. that's pretty shocking.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I'm glad that that exists now,
Right.
but it was pretty shocking. And it was, so I went and looked into it because I was reading, there's all these conversations about, that we're expanding BNI to more national lenders, and is that a good thing? This was funded by a big national lender. And so it just, to me, it reinforces that there's a role for equity that everyone can help play, and we need you to help tell those stories.